Hey, it's Mazzy, and welcome back to the channel. For the last few weeks, I've been compiling a best 25 films from this century. I'm starting in the year 2000, so I know people like to get all wonky saying the century actually started in 2001, but that's coming in the next few days. My top 25 films of this first part of the century, the first 25 years. But I thought I'd go through my CD collection and my soundtracks, scores and soundtracks. So obviously a score is the musical, a lot of times classical music, but not necessarily. It could be jazz, could be rock, custom recordings for a particular movie scores. And then there are, of course, the soundtracks where they have a list of songs. Think of American Graffiti. Think of Clockwork Orange, where they were put together. Although Clockwork Orange mixes vintage recordings with new Wendy Carlos recordings of the time. So I'm going to go through some of my collection now. This is the CD era where I had, I think, heavily into compact discs for about 20 years, from about 1986 to about for the next 20 years after that, basically 2005, 2006, where I bought very few LPs. And what's great about soundtracks, they really do well on compact disc in terms of the flow of the music. Now, this isn't a video doing the virtues and the negative things of compact disc versus vinyl. This is just for the music stupid, as I say. Back in the late 80s, a friend of mine had this great CD storage system. These were called the Racket system. Apparently they advertised in the back of Goldmine and other hi-fi and record magazines at the time. They were made by Pears Matson in San Francisco, coincidentally, out by Candlestick Park. And my friend was moving and renovating his house, and they didn't fit, so I got them from him cheap. And then, of course, over the years, I would get a few other drawers when Pears Matson would have this like second sale. They no longer make them. There was a gentleman that was kind of modifying and making additional components for them, but they're cool. They're a drawer setup, different than what I have back here. This is a good portion of my compact discs, but all my soundtracks are in these drawers. So I pulled out the first four drawers of my soundtrack section, and I'm gonna just kind of randomly kind of pull through some of them and showcase the music, because I love these. And when I'm in the mood of just relaxing, I'll put these on. Obviously, some are more volatile and intense than others, and some are more serene. But I just like the idea of like modern classical music, scoring for motion pictures. So let me start out with one that is a little different. Hal Willner, who died during the pandemic, put out this record. And this is the music of Nino Rota. And this is basically a series of records that Hal Willner did on Thelonious Monk, on Disney music, Walt Disney's music, from Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs on. He's done a series of these wonderful, wonderful records. And he takes these composers and these musicians like David Amron, Dave Samuels, Bill Frisell, the Carla Bly Band, and does some music, Jackie Byard as well, from recreating scores. Now, Nino Rota was a composer who did most of the Fellini scores. And this particular one, or scores he did, the score he did for Armacord. A beautiful film. I'm a big fan of Fellini, the Italian director, and I love this expanded CD, gatefold replica sleeve, and it's just kind of a cool music. It's a good vibe. One of my favorites in my collection here. I have a series of scores from Woody Allen films. And now Woody Allen is a little different because he takes unique classical pieces and jazz music. And this is one I really like, Woody Allen movies. This has everything from Ben Webster jazz to Count Basie to Gershwin fragments to Tommy Dorsey, classical to jazz, and from other soundtracks. So these aren't composed. Now, he has done some things with Dick Hyman that are originally scored for his music, but this is one of my favorites as well. This is another one. This is Woody Allen movie music. So you have music from Stardust Memories, Radio Days, Alice, Shadow and Fog. Shadow and Fog would have the Alabama song by Bert Holbrecht and Kurt Weill. Of course, many of you would know it because of the Doors covering it on their first album. You'd have Sing Sing Sing, Louis Prima from Manhattan Murder Mystery, and so on. A lot of great music, and Woody Allen was great about finding great jazz and classic jazz, big band music, and classical music for his movies. One of my favorite soundtracks is Amélie, and this is music by Van Tiersen. This is the French film. This is a film that's a very favorite of mine from this quarter century here. And this soundtrack is just so beautiful. It's kind of a neoclassical modern music with some just beautiful expressionists, and it really works well with this wonderful film. So Amélie, great film and a great score. One of the scores that I remember as a kid that just kind of was so eerie, and I love those science fiction films from the 1950s, but the Bernard Herrmann score for The Day the Earth Stood Still, Michael Rennie, Patricia Neal, it's just a wonderful, eerie, beautiful score. Now, this is a later recording. A lot of these would be other people doing, like classical compositions, like classical records. So these aren't necessarily the original music that was in the film, but taking, in this case, the Bernard Herrmann written score and re-recording it. This is Joel McNeely who conducted this particular version of it. But what a wonderful record, wonderful music. One of my favorite American composers of the 20th century and 21st century is Randy Newman. Of course, his popular records, his records like Sail Away and Rednecks and Good Old Boys, but he's done a plethora of wonderful movie scores, and one of my favorites he's done is Avalon, music by Randy Newman. It's a very Americana-like score, very much like Aaron Copland in that vein. He's done a series of music for Barry Levinson, and this is a Barry Levinson film, and this is really beautiful. It's a very American score and a very beautiful recording. Randy Newman, Avalon. Two of my favorite composers that cross over from the rock and roll vein are Nick Cave and Warren Ellis. And The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford is a brilliant score here. Beautiful movie, beautiful score. Again, the American West. There's a scene in the bar scene where Nick Cave is even in it playing and singing music. So this is one of my very favorites. And this is Nick Cave and Warren Ellis's The Assassination of Jesse James. Amongst my favorite scores are the ones that mix newly composed music with classical pieces and rock pieces and makes for a great listen. And amongst my favorites too is Being John Malkovich, the Spike Jonze film with a score composed and produced by Carter Burwell. It opens up with Amphibian by Bjork, and including a remix by John Malkovich, ending with the film mix by Bjork. Also is a segment of Allegro by Bartok by the Cleveland Symphony Orchestra. So it's a wonderful film, a surreal type of film. One of my favorite films, again, in the last quarter century, but Being John Malkovich, just a brilliant soundtrack. The Coen brothers are amongst my favorite. T-Bone Burnett worked with them on some of their soundtracks, but this is one of my favorites too. And this is mostly found music, in fact, song-based music, but sometimes they take on a different personality when you're using it in front of a film. And The Big Lebowski, of course, is just one of those. It opens up with A Man in Me, a Bob Dylan song that I don't think got a lot of love before it was used in here. You have Captain Beefheart. You have Elvis Costello, even Ima Sumac, who has that, 6-7 octave range of vocals. And I love her albums that were on Capitol Records. You got Nina Simone. You have Kenny Rogers in the first edition, just dropped in to see what condition my condition was in. Probably one of the best psychedelic songs from someone who would become a big sort of country pop singer. And that's used brilliantly in the bowling scene when Jeff Bridges is flying with the bowling ball in the sky at night. Beautiful rendition. You got Meredith Monk, you got Harry Mancini, you got Gypsy Kings doing their version, of course, their hit version of Hotel California, and you end with a cover of Dead Flowers by Townes Van Zandt. Another masterful soundtrack, a collection of songs that work as a playlist. That's what's great about soundtracks like this. They just work as playlist. There's one soundtrack that everyone needs in their collection from my point of view, and there's been reissues and additions every few years because of the series, and that's the soundtracks from James Bond. You have the theme songs from James Bond. You have the main theme from James Bond on here, and of course all those great songs from Dr. No, John Barry Orchestra, to Goldfinger, Shirley Bassey, probably the best one, from The Spy Who Loves Me, Carly Simon, For Your Eyes Only, Sheena Easton, Louis Armstrong, Paul McCartney and Wings, Live and Let Die. As much as I like that, it almost seems like the one that doesn't fit in the story here. Gladys Knight, License to Kill, Matt Monro from Russia with Love, another of my favorites, Tom Jones, Thunderball. Maybe my favorite next to Goldfinger is You Only Live Twice, that kind of eerie orchestration, John Barry orchestration with Nancy Sinatra singing, and on and on. This has Sheryl Crow, Garbage, Moby, and on till whenever this one came out. Obviously, there's been several more since, and every few years you got to buy another James Bond if you want the whole collection. So James Bond is one that's a necessity. Favorite film of mine, and one of the most interesting soundtracks in my collection. I have it on vinyl. I have various variations. Vince Guaraldi did impressions of this, impressions of Black Orpheus. Of course, the Brazilian, samba all the way. This is a beautiful soundtrack from Rio de Janeiro, the Carnival, that mixes not only this music written for this, but the sound effects from the film and the brilliance of the music in the film. It's a very musical film, and the music kind of chimes in, mixing all this up. Just a wonderful, wonderful bossa nova-like film, sort of a Romeo and Juliet story, Buffalo 66. Of course, directed by Vincent Gallo with Christiana Ricci. This is one motherfucker of a whacked out film, intense film. In fact, on one of the lyrics on the first Wet Leg album, she mentions this movie, and not in a good way. She thinks Vincent Gallo is crazy as hell, and he is. But this has music he composed to the film. I saw a concert at a club in San Francisco maybe 15 years ago with Vincent Gallo and Sean Ono Lennon. And it was pretty cool, pretty minimal, pretty out there, avant-garde, a little bit of a folk thing, experimental. On the soundtrack is Yes, King Crimson, Stan Getz, Nelson Riddle, and Vincent Gallo Sr. Of course, his father was a singer-composer too. So Vincent Gallo, Buffalo 66. Let's talk a little about Angelo Badalamenti. Most people know him because of his theme of Twin Peaks and his collaborations with David Lynch. But one of the most beautiful, haunting scores, aside from all those great David Lynch scores, is the film by Junette and Caro, The City of Lost Children. This is a movie that should be in every collection. It's an ethereal film. It's a beautiful film. Now, one of my all-time favorite soundtracks is A Clockwork Orange. Of course, Walter Carlos became Wendy Carlos. Her mix of the synthesizer, of course, got famous doing Switched on Bach, turned a generation onto classical music back in the 1960s. But beautiful renditions of Beethoven and Pomp and Circumstance and other classical pieces from the Moog synthesizer. A great soundtrack. Again, this to me is a must-have. If I didn't have all these, this would probably be one of the 10 soundtracks that I would own in my collection. Clockwork Orange, of course, the Stanley Kubrick film. Great, great soundtrack. Next is the soundtrack to Crumb by Terry Zwigoff, the director out of San Francisco, who did this brilliant documentary on R. Crumb, the cartoonist, illustrator. Tragic interviews with his brothers. One brother just barely off the street, living in a tenement house in the Tenderloin district of San Francisco, off of South of Market maybe. A beautiful film, but a stab at reality here. Obviously, R. Crumb into collecting himself a lot of 78s of blues and jazz, old country stuff, and he takes from that and puts it on this soundtrack. And this is, again, another brilliant soundtrack of music that reflects literally R. Crumb's story and his collection. And great that he sold his sketchbooks, traded his sketchbooks for a house in France. And years ago, around the time of this documentary, he had moved to this house in France. This soundtrack is on Royco disc, and it's a wonderful, brilliant soundtrack. Dead Men Walking. I love it when two soundtracks come out, one promoting and showcasing the score of the motion picture, one taking on songs. You have the music inspired by Dead Men Walking, artists that wrote and performed songs for it, from Bruce Springsteen, Johnny Cash, Suzanne Vega, Lyle Lovett, Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan with Eddie Vedder. To me, that's the kicker. That's where I fell in love with Eddie Vedder more than Pearl Jam. I like this combination on this score on here. Michelle Shocked, Steve Earle, Patti Smith. This is a wonderful collection of songs that relate to this movie of a man on death row with Sean Penn. Gorgeous thing. Now, this is music of David Robbins. You have some of that Eddie Vedder and Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan on here, and also Ry Cooder and V.M. Bott. This is more of the score side of things. And I just love when occasionally they do the score and then they do the music inspired from the film. This is Henry and June. And this is a film by Philip Kaufman, a Bay Area film director who worked on The Right Stuff is one of his films. This is a beautiful score, very kind of neoclassical. There are things from Debussy. There are Eric Satie pieces on here. There are little vignettes, very romantic movie. And I just love this. Henry and June, the soundtrack of the great film by Philip Kaufman on here. I think I'll end today's video with The Hotspot. This is a film directed by Dennis Hopper, is with Don Johnson, Virginia Madsen, Jennifer Connelly, Charles Martin Smith. And this is music partially composed by Jack Nitzsche, who worked with, remember The Lonely Surfer back in the 1960s? And of course, his 70s collaborations with Neil Young. And this is a cool soundtrack because, again, this is song-based for the most part with some of Jack Nitzsche's orchestral arrangements. But you got John Lee Hooker, Miles Davis, Taj Mahal, Roy Rogers, Tim Drummond, Earl Palmer, Bradford Ellis. You got this funky, swampy, soulful sound. You feel the heat of the South here. And what a great soundtrack. This just simmers with heat and sweat and sensuality. Jennifer Connelly and Don Johnson here. Cool movie. Again, a movie that is more of a cult film. There's some great things about it. Doesn't, I don't think, work 100%. But I'm going to, again, talk more about the music and the soundtrack. But this is a great listen. It's kind of, again, funky as hell and a great listen. So that's the end of part one. I have no idea when part two is going to happen. But in between some of the other videos of new releases and for my vinyl collection, this is a good way to share the music because it is about the music. And these are great records to put up. So for the last weekend, I've been playing a lot of these soundtracks and just let them play throughout while I'm doing things in the house. That's what they're great about. It's like playlists and things. So thanks for watching. Mazzy loves you.